Okay, we're live. Just count to 5 and then you're good.
Greetings, everyone, from different corners of the world. It's an honor to be with you in this Zoom land today. Most of you have been part of the process from the beginning, but just to remind you, my name is Fulata Moyo, and I think you will have our bios on the chat if you need to know more about each of the panelists as well as me. But this far, we have journeyed on this pilgrimage of justice and peace from the session where we were answering the ancestral call of legacy and leadership to the signpost of the healing in our lament, all the way to hope, unity within diversity. Today, this fourth episode comes at the beginning of the Lent season. And therefore, it really is the celebration in transformation that looks at the spiritual renewal that leads to the last episode, which will be on resurrection. And so today, as this is Thursday, you see most of us are in black. And you remember that it's Thursdays in black for a world without rape and violence. And so it is a time where even transformation, the understanding of transformation is at a time when we also acknowledge the reality of pain and woundedness that many of our sisters actually experience because of sexual gender-based violence. But we have an able panel today of 3 sisters who have taken and still take this pilgrimage of justice and peace in their own life and experience. And they are united in so many ways. And I think one of the ways that we will hear from their voice is the way they have participated in the journeys of transformation, in the journeys of informing and shaping the young theologians or people in theological education for the future. But I will not take their time. I want to introduce each one of them. At the beginning, I will just introduce each one of them briefly, and then when they take to the floor, they can say more about themselves. Okay, so we have the first panelist is Reverend Dr. Marjorie Lewis of university. She's a university chaplain at Acadia University in Nova Scotia. She is first transformative leading woman to become president of UTC. I wanted to mention that because of that watershed. And she has done so many other things that she can talk to herself. The second one will be Dr. Kimberly Limo, who is an associate convener of the Black Catholic Theological Symposium. And she is a pastoral associate at St. Sabine Catholic Church in Chicago. She's a preacher, professor, retreat and workshop facilitator, and so many other things that she will talk to herself. And our third speaker is Maria Schuler. She's a former World Council of Churches program executive for combating racism, the program itself. Now she is a retired missionary of global ministries of the United Methodist Church, and she served at Koinonia until her retirement. She's based in Brazil, and she will talk more about her work and her experience. So without taking much of their time, each one is given 5 minutes to actually provoke conversation. And so I welcome each of you panelists, but also each of you participating in this conversation to this Zoom land today. You're welcome. Over to you. Over to you, Marjorie.
Thank you, Fulata. Just to quickly say thanks to Angelique, to everyone in Poween, to fellow panelists and all who are on this, and especially to Marcelo, who's going to make sense of what we're doing. I want to start first with a territorial acknowledgement. Acknowledge that I am in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which Mi'kmaq and Maliseet people first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with surrender of lands and resources, but in fact, recognized Mi'kmaq and Maliseet title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. And so we go to, all right, Marcelo, could you put the slides up for me, please? Thank you. Okay, so we'll go to slide 2. Since publishing the lecture that was delivered at the conference for the 20th anniversary of the Decade of Churches in Solidarity with Women, I've had a lot of changes in my place of ministry. That paper was entitled Mainstreaming Gender in Theological Education, and it focused on my experience at the United Theological College of the West Indies, where I was president, and informed by other international conversations that I had had. Now I'm in a new context. The context is Canada. And whereas Jamaica is overwhelmingly Protestant, Canada has a larger percent of Roman Catholics and more statistically significant percentages of Orthodox Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, and Buddhist persons. I find it interesting that both in Canada and in Jamaica, over 20% of the population identifies as non-religious. Next slide, please. Next slide, Marcel. Oh, sorry. Okay. So, sorry. So we're at slide 3. You're seeing on the left of this slide, beautiful section of the stained glass window in the chapel. It's very interesting because the figures are all in brass and therefore not identifiable ethnically, very easily identifiable ethnically. And I think you'll figure out what this particular pane is all about. So there's a copy of, a picture of the chapel as it is many days in this season, full of snow. And this is in contrast to the United Theological College of the West Indies in sunny Jamaica. So this is the change. My audience now is theological education to the campus rather than theological education for students in ministry. Slide 4, please. You're seeing a picture in this slide entitled Mainstreaming Gender in Context of a section of the Irvine Botanical Gardens, because one of the wonderful things about Acadia is that they have botanical gardens in which people can go to meditate, just enjoy nature, and it's beautiful any time of the year. So that's the advertisement for the Irvine Garden. But issues of intersectionality remain important in what is here a white majority context, as against where I was at UTC, which was a Black majority context. Another change is that gay marriage rights for Two-Spirit LGBTQ people is in the law and also a matter of church policy for some denominations and congregations which are affirming of gay people. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a major source of wounding for our students, where we have to deal with a lot of loss, grief, isolation, loss of the normal rituals around graduation, loss of contact through the normal student experiences, financial problems, and generally concerns about mental health problems and how people are managing in the context of the pandemic. In terms of the chapel's work, we seek to link town, gown, and chapel. Next slide, slide 5. So in terms of the reimagining the future with the pilgrimage and holding in context ideas of resurrection and diakonia in the world today, my local context is a place where we have reflection. And reflection comes through our weekly services and Bible studies, daily prayer, and particularly during Black History Month, I've introduced, pardon me? I've introduced ideas around Thurman and Sean Copeland and so on. Choir, research, and response to community needs are part of what we do. Team consists of the choir director, and the chapel assistants. And we seek through our action to express hospitality, spiritual care, collaboration, and advocacy. The final slide shows one of our more recent projects entitled Black Perspectives in Ethics, an interdisciplinary conversation, which looked at Black and white professors across about 4 disciplines, looking at Black perspective in ethics. And for me, that final slide on slide 8 is a visual expression of where I think we need to be now, that in the context of COVID-19 and all the changes, we need to be surfing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Dr. Marjorie, for taking us through your journey of celebration of transformation and the great work that you are doing. Let's move on to our sister, Dr. Kimberly Limo. Please, it's your floor.
Good morning. It is such a pleasure to be here on this morning and on this panel with these wonderful ladies. I want to thank Angelique and Erica Eliom, the co-convener of the webinars, and the 2 people that I've really had the pleasure of working with over the last 4 years on Poween. So it's been a pleasure to be involved in the leadership team of this, and just to be involved in just being able to connect with so many people across the world. Yesterday, we started the Christian season of Lent. And usually that is a time we give up something. I heard Reverend Dr. Raquel Letzum say that we have given up so much and lost so much in the last year. So let's not focus on what we give up on this during this Lent, but to draw closer to God during this time. However, it is not a time to be complacent, because there is a lot of work to be done in racism, in food insecurity, in mass incarcerations, and so many other problems that affect Black people, not only in this country, but across the world. This is a time to hear from God on how we as Black people should move forward. My article in the World Council of Churches Ecumenical Review outlines a model of dioceses and theological schools to partner together to provide funding for African American lay people to receive a theological education and then to commit to ministering for 3 years in the Black Catholic community. I don't know if any of you saw, especially here in the States, saw Henry Louis Gates' documentary that aired on the last couple of nights about the Black church. And what was missing in his documentary were Black Catholics, even though the image of the Black Christ that was portrayed in the documentary was filmed at St. Sabina Church. No mention of Black Catholics and their story was mentioned in the documentary. And not only Black Catholics, there were some other Black Christians that were not mentioned. Black Catholics have always had to fight to get their story known. And just like Black folks in general, most of us have to take control of our own narratives, tell our stories to young people in the world so that they are aware of whose shoulders we stand and how far we have come by faith. So this morning, I would like to center my thoughts around the idea of the importance of investing in Black Catholic theological education and encouraging them to use their voice to tell the story of Black Catholics in the Catholic Church, as well as the church and the world at large. In 1989, Sister Thea Bowman spoke to the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops about what it means to be Black and Catholic. And she said that we bring our history, our traditions, our experiences, our song, our dance, our teaching, our preaching, our spirituality as gifts to the church. Father Cyprian Davis wrote the book History of Black Catholics in the United States in 1990s so that the world would be aware that Black Catholics have been around before the enslavement from Africa. There are many Black Catholic theologians whose prophetic voices need to be heard. In 1990, Dr. Sister Jamie Phelps started the Totem program at Catholic Theological Union, where I am now the director of that program and am a product of the Totem program from Catholic Theological Union, where I received my master's in divinity. Because she started it because there were so many professionally qualified people working in the Catholic Church, of course, as volunteers and not necessarily as paid staff, because they lack the theological education that is required to hold those positions. So then, thus, the full scholarship program was birthed. M. Sean Copeland, Professor Emerita at Boston College, an award-winning theologian who specializes in practical political Catholic theology, theological anthropology, and African-American intellectual history and religious experience, wrote the book, Enfleshing Freedom, Body, Race, and numerous books. And so many other Black theologians that we can talk about. But as we are reimagining this future of theological education in Pan-African women and developing and encouraging theological scholarship, we must, as young people, we must, as people, actually stay woke. That term over the last several years tells us to understand that we want to understand the real world and know things that can change in an instant. Be aware of the need and committed to social justice. For Black Catholics' voices to be heard in the Catholic Church and the church at large, as well as Pan-African women's voices to be heard, no matter the denomination, there must be ways for we must interest young people in pursuing theological studies so that we can hear their voices in the future. Like we heard young Amanda Gorman, the 22-year-old Black Catholic poet, who recited her poem at the inauguration. And the second thing is we need to assist them financially to help them pursue theological education and studies so that we can hear their voices in the future. If there are no Black voices to tell our stories and control our narratives, we run the risk of future generations not knowing the richness and giftedness of Black people throughout the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sister Kimberly, for bringing up the necessity of the voice of Black Catholics and their theological education needs. We'll move on to Maria, to finish off and share her own story of, what is her journey of celebrating this in transformation. Thank you, my sister.
Thank you very much, Fulata. And it's a pleasure, it's an honor to be here with Marjorie, with Kimberly, and all the other sisters and brothers that might be listening to us this morning. It is a pleasure for me to share the reflections that I have shared in the journal, in the Ecumenical Review in 2019, if I'm not mistaken. But before I go into my brief presentation, I just wanted to show to you and to share a memory of something very important to many of us, that is the T-shirt of the Ecumenical Decade of Churches in Solidarity with Women, the festival. So today, in Thursdays in Black, I'm wearing this T-shirt that is a vintage T-shirt. And I have here with me also the bag that we shared at that time. It is the Decade Festival Visions Beyond 1998, Ecumenical Decade of Churches in Solidarity with Women. So when we had this wonderful gathering in Zimbabwe, and I wanted to bring to our heart and to our memory that wonderful experience. The reflections I wanted to share with you are a summary of the last part of my article in Ecumenical Review. And there are two elements I wanted to start to highlight at the beginning. Is the fact that we as women of color, as women of African descent, resilience, resistance, and perseverance are our everyday cup of tea, is our lifelong way of living. And the second element I wanted to share is the element of faith. We as Christians, we have faith in God and Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit in our vocation and calling as Christians and as women of African descent. That nurtures our journey, that nurtures our ministries in so many different areas. So, and in my article, I put out some elements that I wanted to highlight as a contribution to the reflection on how Pan-African women have a canon based on the stories and experiences that connect us, women of African descent and African women as well. The first one is the intersection of oppressions. So we use the intersecting of oppressions as key to our theological reflection. We understand that the political approach of intersecting the oppressions help us in our analytical framework. We attempt to identify the impact of the interlocking of systems of powers in our lives. The second element that we have engaged on is connected to is the issue of Black consciousness. That is not a light matter. The personal consciousness of Blackness has led us to develop a theological approach that speaks to in our own ethos, and that offer African descent women a perspective The approach nurtures Black consciousness and critically looks at our own place and our role in church and society. The third element I would like to share is in entry points and lenses and analyzing and interpreting reality in our way of theologizing. We use the objective conditions of our lives and communities. This includes our experiences, our struggles with discrimination, or having and maintaining living conditions, our struggles with deficient of or lack of support systems, for example, housing, schooling, health, employment. And I would like to highlight that in Brazil, during this time of the pandemic, this situation has been exacerbated in relation to the African descent population. More than ever, it became very clear the situation of African descent communities and indigenous communities in terms of the inequalities that we live in Brazil, and also matters of police aggression and brutality, particularly the killing of young people and the incarceration of African descent men. So, and the fourth element is the fact that there is a pressure to conform to the predominant white standard in Western society. So, people face a constant struggle between who they are as persons and their own culture, history, and gender, and what is expected of them. And I would like to give an example with regards of that, is that African descent women, even when they are fully trained pastors with degrees in theology and other graduate areas, patriarchy and racism operate in ways to hinder their full participation and belonging. And to finally, the last aspects I would like to speak about is in terms of in face of that, these realities, those very brief points of realities I mentioned, and as we look to the future and projecting our gain or whole and wish for sisterhood to remain a strategy for reality. So what I wanted to say with that exploring of alternatives of network of support is a very, very important element. The exchange of experiences, strategies of struggle, and support systems that could alleviate our burdens and give us hope and vision also for the future. And in that element of sisterhood, I also would like to include a very important aspect on theological approach, that is the decolonial perspective, the decolonial approach that is so present in the reflection, in theological reflection of African descent women in different parts of the world, but I particularly highlight also my sisters in Latin America that are working on decolonial approach. So I would like to leave at that, to those reflections, and I thank you very much for listening, and I turn the mic to Fulata.
Thank you so much, Maria, for bringing up the different perspectives to how actually we move on to reimaging the future. And I think one thing that unites all these interesting and very compelling interventions is the fact that intersectionality is very important when we are looking at questions of justice from oppression. And I think we had a very interesting conversation about whether it was really Kimberly Crenshaw who invented the intersectionality feminism word? Or was it Alice Walker when she talked about womanist as really actually the point of starting off this conversation of intersectionality? So it's very important, the issues each one of you has lifted up. And I think now we open it to the floor for if you have questions, comments, this is your time. And I would ask also Sister Angelica Walker-Smith to chip in when she sees some of the questions or comments that need to come forward. So over to you. Everyone, your voice is important. Welcome. Remember to unmute yourself when.
Good morning, sisters. My name is Reverend Barbara Breland. I'm the pastor of Destiny Temple of Faith in Alexandria, Virginia. Thank you so much for this wonderful and insightful dialogue and conversation about women and the challenges and that we face in ministry. I have a question for Dr. Kimberly Lymore. I did watch the history of the Black church the past 2 days, and you're right, the Catholic Church, the Black Catholics were missing from the webinar, from the discussion. But one of the questions I have for you, Dr. Lymore, is in light of the challenges that Black women face in ministry, in getting ordained in the Protestant church and all faiths, how would you encourage a young Pan-African woman that is Catholic? How would you encourage her in light of to pursue a profession in theological ministry and ordination when women are not ordained in the church, particularly if this young woman feels a call to the priesthood and to the pastorally ministry, that she would not be able to realize that dream and that mission and passion in the Catholic Church. Because many of us in the Protestant church still face struggles with it. Sometimes at least we can get ordained, but in the Catholic Church, they cannot even be ordained. So what would you say to young sisters and sisters, period, to encourage them to follow their dream and that passion and that calling? And where would they go to do the work, particularly since the work of going to seminary is very, very expensive?
Thank you so much, sister. Can we collect 2 more questions before I hand over to the panelists to answer, so that we, any more questions? We want to collect at least 3. Yes, Dion.
Good morning, sisters, and thank you so much for your presentations, powerful presentations. I have a question around what you brought up exactly, Dr. Mayo. I was going to, Dr. Moyo, I was going to bring up the same thing, the question of why is it that we find that not only Pan-African women, but just women across the board, when we're talking about the work of justice and the work of intersectionality towards justice, particularly ending gender-based violence, etc., where we need the whole community to come together, why is it that we find that we lean more towards feminism rather than a womanist perspective that brings together the entire community towards helping that reality? That was one question. And then the other was for Dr. Schuler, in terms of speaking a little bit more to what you were sharing around the Diakonia and the perspectives there, and how is it that you all are actualizing that, in your work? Thank you again.
So thank you. We have 3 questions. So one is directly sent to Kimberly, and the other one directed to Maria. But I think, Marjorie, you can also respond to the questions as well, especially the intersectionality one. Thanks. To save time quickly.
Dr. Breland, thank you for your question. Unfortunately, we cannot be ordained in the Catholic Church, but there's so many other things that we can do. If a woman, though, feels very called to ordination, unfortunately, I would have to suggest she would have to go to another denomination, because it's really not going to happen, I don't think, at least in my lifetime. Maybe as Pope Francis would want to get women ordained as deacons, at least, might happen in the next years or so. But unfortunately, yes, they have to go to another, but there's so many other ways to just try to reach out and fulfill your calling, and especially in justice areas. I've been blessed to have a pastor who has, encourages women in ministry. So I can do things that most Catholic people in Catholic churches cannot do. We preach and we minister, we do a lot of the outreach. So unfortunately, though, the Catholic Church is very limited in that, and that's kind of keeps the young people away from that too.
Thank you, Dr. Limor.
Marilia and Marjorie, comment?
Fulata, I would appreciate if the sister that just made the question, I wasn't sure if she was talking about Diakonia, no? Was it
Yeah.
about Diakonia? Okay, I just wanted to make sure. And probably because I have a connection with, a strong connection with the word koinonia, that comes from the word koinos, and the connection with the organization in which I served. The thoughts that come to mind on the light of her question is that the networking and the service that Pan-African women do in their own contexts, but I'm focusing on the Brazilian reality. There is a need for to belong to church communities, but also to belong to our own ancestral histories. And in that, our services then to the community, being that community, a grassroots community or a church, an ecclesial community, that we can also bring these elements of history, the connection that we have as Pan-African women, and our history as Pan-African women is not disconnected to the history of our churches, our communities. So, and that intersect with the intersectionality that Fulata also mentioned. For instance, when I started studying theology, it was so incredible a day when I realized that I have in church, in Sunday school, in my theological formation, in the School of Theology, in so many contexts, there was no connection between the African descent woman that I was and the history of the church where I was being formed. So there is a disconnection there, and that is just one example. So the intersectionality, when we see those different lenses, we use those different lenses to understand our reality, it really not only help us to be empowered in ourselves, but also when we read the Bible, when we are speaking about our Christian background, for example, we are better able to make the connections and to have a pastoral word that also touches those elements. We are one in Christ thanks be to God, but we come from different backgrounds. We do have different histories. So that has to be appropriated in our own way of life in our church communities and services. Those are some of my thoughts.
Thank you so much. Marjorie, there is a particular question on the chat to you, which says they want to know what were some of your experiences regarding patriarchy as you were president of UTC.
I published a paper on that, actually. Beyond the Glass Ceiling, it's called, published somewhere. But I'll come back to that, and I want to, let me start with Sister Dion's questions. Thank you for those questions. I have been around long enough to know that the word does not return void. And I think, especially when you're teaching, with bell hooks, we're teaching to transgress, and teaching is one of the most revolutionary experiences. So whether you're doing it through your sermons in a theological seminary, you know, that exposing people to ideas and a lifestyle does wonders. So from my context, I mean, I just had to skip through very quickly, but it's a small group I'm working with on a weekly basis, 6 chapel assistants basically. But those 6 chapel assistants are going to touch other people, and other people may pop in. So I'm teaching them I mean, they don't have to get the whole depth of the theory, but how you do listening surveys. And we talk about what are the generative things, what are people passionate about, and how do we listen on social media as against the kind of thing coming from Paulo Freire, where you hang out in the bars or the hairdressers. So how do we listen to what's happening on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook? What are the students talking about on their accounts, and how do they do that? And then with the intersectionality, it's just there. So for Black History Month, we looked at the Queen of Sheba. We looked at the Ethiopian eunuch from both Black and queer perspectives, which is a whole other story, right? But there's a whole development in queer theology about the eunuchs as a third gender. So what does it mean that this man he's Black and he's a eunuch? And there's some good stuff on that, even just going online. And for Black History Month, we are also looking at Howard Thurman, and I had sent a little note to Kimberly to say Sean Copeland. This is Roman Catholic territory, right? But most of the Black Roman Catholics are immigrants, and people don't know anything about that. So I think the longer I live, I'm more realistic, to use Marilia's term, about what I can achieve. And the thing is to do what you can do where you are. So whoever the people you're called upon to minister, then mainstream that perspective, that intersectional perspective. And it doesn't have to be a big banner, but these are ways. And I will assure you, I've lived long enough to see institutions break up, Caribbean Conference of Churches, all kinds of NGOs in Jamaica. But the people who got what we used to call back in the day leadership training or animation training, they rise. They rise in whatever institution emerges, right? We may not live to see it, but sister, just know, just do what you can do. And what Marilia spoke about, the solidarity, is really important, because very often when we are battling patriarchy in our space, it is to go to the other thing, it is the international sisterhood that gives us the energy and supports us, and we can call and cry and get some experiences. And maybe we need to do more of that. I would say that intersectionality when it comes to patriarchy is also really important, because certainly my analysis of my situation was that I was not only dealing with patriarchy, but I was dealing with the unfinished decolonial agenda. And then we have to be careful. I felt that way about Obama also, that it was not just a question of race. There was a fundamental dysfunction in the way the Republicans and the Democrats operate. So if you look back at the Clinton era and Ken Starr, you know, the Republican, there was a kind of, you know, attack in terms of how the politics. So to me, in Obama's case, and I'm not saying I'm at that level, but I felt race was another issue on top of existing patterns of dysfunction, my word, and maybe I'm judging the Americans wrongly, that were there even in terms of the white, just the white structure. And I felt for me, when I looked at my situation, it was not only gender, but there were problems in how leadership was managed, traditions of the ways in which the board dealt with the president, and even how the Constitution was written that set up problems and conflicts, and gender now became another layer on top of it. So that is what I want to offer in terms of patriarchy. It often is not the only thing, and we have to keep that intersectional critique, and know that sometimes we got to be separatists, right? Heal ourselves, go away and rest and get a massage and get our nails done. I have no problem with that. That's part of the revolution. Anyway,
thank you. Thank you so much. Time is not on our side. And so I would like to invite Angelique to make some comments about our next phase before we actually we wrap up completely.
And good day, greetings to everyone. This has been amazing. Again, this is the fourth part of our journey, and we just thank God for our presenters and Dr. Moyo for leading us. Marcelo, thank you so much. Okay, get ready. The last one is coming. Boo-hoo. But guess what? We may come up with something later. So what we would like for you to do is prepare yourself for March 18th. I'm going to share my screen so you can see the wonderful details that are coming up relative to the next webinar. Just bear with me a moment. I think Marcelo will allow me to share my screen. Hold on. Okay, there you have it. So wonderful details coming up for our next webinar. We will be addressing the theme of Reimagining the Future, Part 2. This was Part 1. And of course, it will be the anticipation of the Great Resurrection in the Easter season. So as we begin the Lenten season, we're on this journey to that moment of the resurrection, the great day. And so that will be a theme for us next time. We also will be looking at the theme, of course, of Thursdays in Black. This is an ongoing theme of what we have been doing. But we will also remember two of our dearly departed. You don't want to miss that. We are going to be remembering the Reverend Robina Winbush. She was a part of the Pauline journey. Many of you knew her or knew about her. She was a member of the Central Committee of World Council, member of the Presbyterian Church USA, ecumenical leader writ large. We will remember her, but we will also remember our past president from Africa. We will remember the Reverend Dr. Pilates van Hoffel from South Africa. And she was there also at the beginning of the journey of Pauline and Pan-African women. And we want to honor her. Both of their articles are in the journal, so prepare yourself. We are honored that the niece, the goddaughter niece of Dr. van Hoffel will be joining us to help us remember Dr. van Hoffel. We will also be honored with the presence of the Reverend Nicole Ashwood, who is our leader now, who followed Dr. Moyo in the community of just women, community of women and men for the World Council of Churches, coming from the region of the Caribbean. And then we will have clips that will be representative of these dearly beloved sisters, our ancestors, the great cloud of witnesses. And you will be given the opportunity to name sisters in the great cloud of witnesses for you. the ancestors. So bring your memories to put them in the chat and to remember with us. And then we will be moderated. Our moderator will be the Reverend Everdeth Laudra, who was also a part of the original core committee and still is with us. She just moderated our Young Women's session for the last conference we just had. And that link to that conference is in the chat. So this will be a time of looking back and looking forward against Sankofa and celebrating our legacy and how we move forward together. So Dr. Moyo, thank you for allowing me to share this announcement. We are looking forward to you joining us.
Yeah, so thank you so much for appetizing us for the future. But I want all of us to turn on our cameras to thank our three wonderful panelists. And while we are doing that, I want to ask our three panelists to really to give us, each one of us, to give us one word that you want us to carry with us to the next conversation. One word. As we applaud you, as we clap our hands, what is the one word that you want us to carry that will nurture and carry to the next conversation?
I would say mine is Sankofa.
Sankofa. Yes, thank you. Our sister.
I would say too,
Uh-huh.
connect, to nurture sisterhood.
To nurture sisterhood. Thank you. You always break the rules. Sister Kimberly.
And I'm gonna use the South African word, Sabonani. We see you, we respect you, we honor you.
Sawonani, thank you so much. Can we please clap hands for our great panelists? Thank you so much. You made this conversation so meaningful, and we carry these words with us to the next conversation. So blessings and love. If I was using the tradition of the Lozi women, the ancient Lozi women in Zambia, I would have said, I lift up my breasts and bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.